can you talk to us then a little bit about feminist psychology, or even the feminist movement, or the relationship between the two in your context in Ireland?
Right. Well, I already talked a little bit about the women's movement starting in the 70s, and it has followed, fairly good development over time in terms of familiar themes, the radical and the liberal, and then institutionalised, and it's a very strong presence, I think, the women's movement in Ireland. It's there, we know about it. It's very active and alive. It may not have achieved its goals, but it's definitely there. Mm-hmm. But psychology is very conservative. Mm-hmm. Adrian Brock will argue that it emerged in around 1960. We have an argument about this, actually. He says it emerged late, and I say no, actually. It's the other ones that emerged early. Oh. Because I'm arguing it's a colonial thing, because Germany and Britain are where it emerged in the 1890s or whenever it did. Mm-hmm. So the majority of countries, as I understand it, it emerged in the 50s and 60s. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's the majority emergence time. So shouldn't that be the norm by which these colonizer countries are early, and we're on time, and then there's late. The whole
changing the rubric. Really.
But anyway, so it emerged. Then it was under threat, and so very understandably, the whole concern about scientific status. Mm-hmm. I think, and just all kinds of reasons why it became very positivist, and it is so in all the universities. And then it became very concerned about its professional status in terms of clinical psychology. This is my basic history of it. Anyway. And in the 90s, there was a huge thing going on about establishing clinical psychology, getting up the career grades, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So there was very little room for critical psychology. Mm. And the idea of politics, I mean, that's why I left psychology, or at least I became anti-psychology, because they just simply would not they would never get involved in any political debates. Mm-hmm. And we had a huge debates about abortion, and one of them was about whether suicide could be a grounds for abortion. We had a case of a 14-year-old girl. Am I going on too much with this?
No.
The so-called X case, 1992. She was 14. She was raped by a neighbour. She got pregnant. Her parents took her to England. You couldn't have abortion. That's actually a remote possibility. So somehow they informed the police that they were taking their daughter to England so that they could take a case against the man. They could take DNA from the fetus before the abortion. And when the police heard this, they said, no, you can't travel. The right to life of the unborn has to be upheld
over even the ability to
over this situation, travel.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But that's how bad it got.
Wow.
And in the middle of all this, she became suicidal. She was literally imprisoned. She wasn't allowed to travel. She threatened suicide, and it was massive. You can imagine the public debate over this.
So imagine being raped and then being imprisoned.
Well, I mean, she was literally kept in her parents' home. She wasn't actually put in prison. But was she going to be? How would they keep her at home? It was horrible, and there was the possibility that a young woman could be. Mm-hmm. But in the middle of all this, then suicide was on the agenda. So what? Oh, if we let them have abortion and they're suicidal, they'll all pretend they're suicidal and all this stuff, And would the PSI come out and say anything? Not a word. They would not, get involved in this debate, even though it was obviously something that psychology should have a lot to say about. Well, you can see the way I'm talking. I was utterly outraged by this. Right. Yeah.
PSI meaning the Psychological Society of Ireland, just for our transcriber.
Yeah. Oh, transcription, right. So that's how conservatives. So Catholic Church is the other piece in all of this. Right. It was the Catholic Church that was involved in setting up psychology, as we all like to say. The Catholic Church knew it was going to happen, so they said, "Get in there." And of course, they influenced the field. We haven't really had a history of that actually. How the Catholic Church, Adrian's done a lot of work on that, but I don't know if he's written it up yet. So between all of the Catholic Church conservatism and all the other issues, it just wasn't going to get involved. So it remained very conservative, is the bottom line. Mm-hmm. And I think people have had I think people left psychology. I think that's why it has been, unfortunately, not developed enough of that kind of critical mass. Because I would have left if it hadn't been for women's studies and the way that I was able to work that connection and have my freedom. Mm-hmm. But if I'd had to do the normative stuff in psychology, I would have left. Yeah. And I think a lot of people who are social activist oriented just didn't go near psychology. They just didn't see it. They went into social work, sociology, the other areas. So the end result has been that there hasn't been a strong development of critical psychology. Right. It's probably less than 10%, maybe 1 or 2 people in each department.
Oh.
Yeah.
That might not be that bad compared to some other places. But so when you talked about the lack of response from the PSI in this case, were there any feminist psychologists in Ireland that spoke out at all about that?
Not well. You see, then you have this debate. Well, yes, I mean within PSI a group did form, and they produced a document on the research on abortion, which is incredibly helpful. It didn't make its way into being a public statement from PSI, but it did become available. Right. On the most of the debate at that point was, actually I forget exactly what the debate was. Was it about that abortion was harmful or not?
Yeah.
And
having an abortion then results in psychological distress, mental disorder, blah blah blah.
Yeah. And so there was a group within PSI, women who were feminist oriented and feminist, who got together to get that document out, but they weren't able to speak as psychologists within PSI. Right. And then what do you do? Then you're just an activist, and then that kind of a thing. So they did have a role, definitely, in the whole thing. Right. Yeah. Okay. And there's always been, women in psychology in Ireland who have been outspoken and supported women's rights and been feminist. Yeah. Right. But they weren't in the universities, except for one, Sheila Green, who was a very strong feminist as well.